All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining the LinkedIn Live here. We have Mike McGee with us, who's the VP of Business Applications at VaynerX. So Mike is a longtime client and a good friend that we've been working with over the past couple of years here, and he has a pretty exciting story about the transformation that he's been going through. Before we dive in, again, I'm Tom Hood. I'm a managing director at SC&H. I have Nick Scott here with me as well, also a managing director, and both of us have been working with Mike throughout the past few years at this client as well as at his previous client as well. So, Mike, really excited to have you here. I know we have a lot to talk about. Looking forward to diving into some very exciting transformation topics with you. Before we go in, I'd like to pass it over to you just to give a little bit of background about your current role and talk a little bit about uh, what you're working on right now.
Absolutely. Tom, Nick, good to see you guys again. Tom, thank you for the intro. Yeah, so in terms of like even the evolution of my current role, I started here at VaynerX 5 years ago, actually just before the pandemic hit, as VP of FP&A, largely in what was intended to be a traditional FP&A type role, corporate budgeting, corporate financing, reporting, management reporting, stat reporting, forecasting, and cash flow reporting. What was apparent early on, obviously, was not news to anybody at the company, was we at that point didn't really have any organized means of information delivery, of actually getting data into the hands of the individuals either making decisions or the individuals that need the data in order to do analysis, in order to even just understand the business. And one of those consumers would typically be, FP&A would typically be on the tail end of that consumption pattern. And it was very hard for us to get our hands on anything. So over time, slowly leaned a little bit more into the kind of consumption, the analysis of the reporting, into how are we actually consuming or consolidating the data to do our reporting, what are the tools that we're using, what are our processes. So it became a little bit more of a finance, business intelligence slash data analytics type role. And then in the last couple months now, it's morphed into more of an entire technology business applications role, where we've started to consolidate just the entire way that we actually just assess and manage our tech stack, specifically the critical business applications components of that tech stack, right? So these are the applications that our users use on a day-to-day basis to perform their jobs, whether it be Salesforce for our business development and client partnerships teams, our HRIS stack like HiBob and ADP for our HR teams, or NetSuite and SPV for our finance teams. So looking at those things holistically, identifying the synergies within them, understanding how data flows inside and in and out of those tools, and trying to improve the value that we achieve from each one of them, complement their strengths or complement their weaknesses and enhance their strengths. So that's how it pretty much morphed. I would say it's hardly a finance role anymore, other than the sense that we do have a couple finance tools sitting underneath my purview still.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty interesting arc that happened there, Mike. Because a lot of what we're seeing, whether it's at other clients or we were just recently down at the North American Finance Executive Summit talking about transformation, and a lot of the trends coming out from people, whether it's at that summit or others, is upskilling is like the number one trend, followed by digital transformation, and then you have Gen AI and some other things falling underneath of that. But it all really just comes down to transformation, which is a continuous journey, right? And that's where you really started initially, where the tech stack was kind of fragmented and things were working in a silo. And then that started out the initial journey while you were still VP of finance or VP of FP&A at that point, right? To
Mm-hmm.
then transforming as the systems transformed. That's ultimately when the need for really the new role that you created there was born, along with an entire additional group of people and skill sets rolling up underneath of you, right? That typically or traditionally wasn't there at VaynerX, right?
Or lived disparately throughout the various functions, right? And in fact, that's one of that's a great way to describe it, Tom. And that's one of actually, I think, the more incredible things about how we even formed the team is we didn't actually bring in resources externally. When we formed the team, there wasn't actually a massive hiring and onboarding of a slew of people that didn't previously work for Vayner. It is actually a collection of people that were in the business in some capacity, some more in the business, some more in the tech. And we have we have a pretty diverse range on the team. But that is how we formed it. So there's operational level experience fused with some pretty strong technical set of skills as well.
So, Mike, I mean, just one of the core things I know I've worked closely with you as you kind of made this transition is even getting started with tools and technologies that you wouldn't even think about being in an FP&A organization. So I know in pockets at VaynerX, folks were using Snowflake for operational reporting and for a whole host of things, but you kind of had a vision of where the finance and accounting team could really start to use that to do a lot of the data synergies and bringing things together for some of the core reporting asks that you had to solve on a day-to-day basis. Could you describe a little bit just around how you saw a vision for that and kind of piloted it and got people on board with like the capabilities to then actually get to the scale that you can operate at today?
Yeah, of course. I think the questions that were being raised even to FP&A weren't novel. There wasn't, a lot of people were turning to us for things as simple as, and at this time, if we rewind the clock to 2020, it could have been something like, what is our headcount at the moment? What does my roster look like? What has my roster looked like over the years? Those are all a little HR focused. And then there were obviously the questions on the more customer lifecycle piece of what does my pipeline look like? What is the health of that? Again, not novel questions. But what it became, very obvious was that there's no one place to answer these questions and one group also that has a control of how that data gets to the hands of users. So it definitely, as we found, the questions we were fielding wasn't necessarily, what is my T&E budget, which we had already solved for that. It was more these are broader business related questions or asks or requests or analysis being needed of which the data wasn't available for. But even then, it was still sitting, for the most part, there's some things we've evolved over time, it was still sitting in a tool somewhere. It was either not the right people have access to it, or do these tools not provide it in the right format for proper reporting and analysis, right? Obviously, these tools are all focused on the user as opposed to the reporting, although every one of the applications has gotten much better on the reporting side. So again, it wasn't a novel problem. It was one of those. In fact, it was probably one of like the easier ones to solve when I first came on board. Was, well, there is obviously technology. It's been around for 20 years that solves this problem, which is to consolidate all this data under one place, whether it be a warehouse or a lake, and then produce that as a synthetic set of values for the people who need to see it.
That's awesome. I think one other thing too that we saw, Tom mentioned being down at the finance executive conference is just the consensus on kind of upskilling and the different skill sets needed within the FP&A organization now. As you're looking to kind of expand your team, and if you're looking for like a new resource coming in, like what are some skill sets that maybe you're looking at now that you find, maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago, you necessarily wouldn't have been looking for in a candidate? Has that changed or evolved at all?
Yeah, without a doubt, and even my own viewpoint on that has changed dramatically. When I first even got here, I was like, well, we don't need individuals that are heavily technology focused, right? I just need some people that understand finance and modeling and planning and budgeting. And I was actually a little bit short sighted in that. I actually think it's almost like I do believe that like the skills needed to operate in this environment, they're more table stakes than I had maybe realized 6, 7 years ago. Everybody still, I think, needs to have their core the core business function that they probably went to school for. But if that's not heavily complemented with an ability to, whether it be, and I'm not even saying it's coding and programming, but I think it's complemented with an ability to interact with technology, to examine problems and be able to apply technological solutions to those problems without maybe over engineering. So I think it's more just the mindset that people have to have, and also just I think everyone has to stay pretty current. That's probably one of the most challenging parts of all of our jobs now, right? Is what you think is not a problem that could be solved via automation right now, you might be mistaken on. There might be solutions out there that maybe 6 months ago weren't. And staying current and apprised of what that looks like, what that landscape looks like, is important for anyone to be competitive, and for an organization to staff those competitive people that can make the organization competitive.
Yeah. I think, Mike, that kind of goes along with one of the concepts that you actually hit on earlier when you were talking, but the notion of the tech stack within finance, right? And I think the way that you laid that out, and then talking about the skills that need to be continually evolving, that's because the tech stack is continually evolving and being built out to support what you're looking for, right? And so what I mean by that is, back in the day, you had really your ERP, then maybe some Excel sitting on top of that, running reports. Then you have the idea of EPM solutions coming in, which we can talk about some of the journey that you all had around that. Then it's all right, not just the ERP and the EPM for budgeting and forecasting, it's all the other operational systems that you mentioned, right? Which is Salesforce, HiBob for in time entry, right? Expenses, all of those other solutions are really what make up the
ecosystem,
tech stack, right? For then your team to then be able to support finance and detailed analysis. And so that's like the continually evolving skill set that's needed to stay, like you said, current along those systems there.
Yeah, I think the demands are constantly getting wider and deeper, which is part of the challenge, obviously, which is where, like, I think finding talented people is so difficult, because yes, the amount of tools to what you just said, right? I think a savvy, probably FP&A professional, and I'm going back now to like 2010, needed to have EPM and strong Excel skills, and probably a little bit of business intelligence. That same individual now, I mean, that would not survive in this world on that set of skills alone. And if they are, they'd have to be pretty deeply technical in those, and not just those three things. But you do need to have an understanding of the rest of the ecosystem of your stack, every one of the tools and how they operate, because everything is interconnected now, obviously through microservices. So each one of these tools actually relies on the other one. Yes, you have to have some experience with all of them in order to stay competitive and be successful.
Yeah. And I think, Nick, that's one of the questions or one of the trends we see a lot again is upskilling. But I think where a lot of people have challenges is answering upskill to what, right? It's always a top trend, but when you start asking, well, what skills do you want your team to have? It's, well, AI. It's like, okay, great. I mean, sure, use ChatGPT, whatever, productivity, but like the AI skill set's not really going to help, right, in the specific context in the organization if you're not really paying attention to the tech stack and upskilling to meet like what's not only there, but then what's coming next, right?
I just think that, I mean, that's been one of the other hot themes is, kind of every executive team is asking for, how are we going to get to AI? What does AI mean? Like, how can we start to use it even in the finance function? Like, when can we get to predictive analytics, large language models, where we can ask our questions, to our data and it tells me the answer? Those are like things and objectives that people want to get to. And I think that a lot of the stuff that, Mike, that you've been able to accomplish, and as you're going through this constant transformation, is you are setting up a better foundation to get there and to actually have core data sets in a way that is governed and centralized for your organization versus, a lot of folks are not there yet. So I think that's just some of the things that you've done and put in place is really where we're advising and trying to help clients to get to. And you're like showing a great example of setting that baseline to even get to an exploratory phase with some of that next level data usage.
Yeah, absolutely. I think going on Tom on the upskilling to what too, like focusing on that before we even bounce into upskilling to AI. I think the idea, and we throw the term around here sometimes, and it's the right way to look at it. It's really upskilling to a growth mindset. Like there isn't necessarily like the skills you might have to upskill today are different than the ones you might have to upskill to tomorrow, and they're different for this company than another one. It's more just how it's your willingness to upskill. And I think it actually cuts both ways, though. It's also the willingness of management and obviously the employers themselves to accept that that there's a runway and a learning curve. But if you see the talent and you obviously, if individuals kind of have the right ideas, they ask the right questions to allow them that runway to upskill. So it has to go both ways. I mean, to me, there's if you're not creating a culture where a humility is actually something encouraged, then you're not going to get that like desire to grow because everyone is going to feel as if they have to come in as the expert. And the fact is, like, we're all like whatever we're the experts in today, it might change tomorrow. So that's just not the case, right? So there has to be that dynamic growth culture. So that's the more important part I'd be looking at. In fact, even when you look at the talent you're looking to hire, it's not even what tools they've worked on or what skills they have. It's actually just how much they've evolved is way more important than what they've actually touched. And then, and moving like to then upskilling an organization for AI. I mean, we're like, I think I don't know enough about where other organizations are in their journey to say that we're way behind or way ahead. I don't think we're either one of those camps. But we definitely know what we have not done yet and what still needs to be done before we deploy anything from an AI standpoint that will do more harm than good. And I'm not saying there's always like there's elements of like AI around collaboration and communication and meeting summarization and the types of tools that are offered just on platforms such as the one we're talking on right now that will make your everyday life easier. But what I'm more talking about is very specific AI use cases for this organization's processes, this organization's data, and what this organization does. All we've done is identify what we need to get to the point where we can then have that conversation. Because like I said, in terms of more harm than good, I mean, if you obviously deploy any type of forecasting or modeling over the data set that hasn't been well vetted, then you actually will wind up producing more. That's obviously the idea of the hallucinations. So we're trying to avoid those.
Yeah, absolutely. I think going back to the upskilling thing real quick, I think one tangible example is so with Alex, right, who really runs NSPB for you guys. He didn't have any of that experience beforehand, right? Even on when it was adaptive before you guys switched to NSPB for your EPM solution. He came in with his background was it more finance or what was his background exactly?
Yeah, I think he was in an FP&A role prior to coming over here. Mm-hmm.
So I think this is like one of the low-hanging fruit for a lot of other finance departments to look at is exactly what you did, is where you take someone who knows finance, who's in a growth mindset, like you said, who's willing to pick up and learn the next tool to then be able to own that. I think we still see a lot of times where finance departments aren't quite fully owning the EPM solution, or it's kind of to the side of what they do. And that brings a lot of gaps in terms of what they're missing out potentially on a lot of functionality that the tool and benefits that the tool could offer them because they don't have the skill set in their domain to advance the use of it. Right. Similar to how you all have done it, which I think is really the right way to go, is having someone with a finance background to own and maintain that solution for your team.
Yeah, and it's ironic because that is what then became the evolution of my team, because as a team now, we don't consider ourselves part of finance. The business applications team, we roll up into what is now called the technology department for that, and it was that exact dilemma that we've been still not struggling with, but I think testing out different models for. So this business applications function they're systems focused individuals who have come from the disciplines for the systems that they're focused on. So as you just said, Alex is focused on the EPM tool, but he was traditionally a finance professional. We have another individual on the team, Melissa, who's focused on our ERP. She was traditionally from an accounting background, and who handles our Salesforce environment with someone who's traditionally from a business development background. Now all those individuals have upskilled to become, to varying degrees, administrators and developers of these tools. And I do think it's like everyone's going to have, and right now, to this day and age, again, to use the word a little bit repetitively, to be competitive, you have to be a double major. You have to have had some experience in the discipline to know the questions to ask and the things and features that'll be helpful. And you have to have experience on the system, either administration, deployment, or adoption side, in order to actually push these solutions to the actual functions themselves.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of heard like that and like a recap. It's like really building out a solution-oriented team. And like you're solution oriented, you have dynamic resources that are able to, again, not only understand the business concepts, but then actually be able to get in and move some of the technology asks and things that you actually need to solve for and deploy. You brought that into a spot where it can actually work, and you have collaboration across teams where that's occurring. Where, again, Tom kind of mentioned it, a lot of places that's very siloed. It's IT. Oh, it's an IT owned function, or that's owned by this. I think you've created a cross-functional transformation team, if you will, resources that are dynamic and solution-oriented to help move this stuff forward. And it'd be difficult if you didn't have that at your disposal, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's Nick. If you don't mind, I'm going to take some of those and put it in the some of the decks we produce as to what the team's vision and mission is. But yeah, that's exactly what our goal is. And naturally, too, even that has created in order to we've had to build trust with the various functions, right? That I trust that you guys are going to keep these tools. What we've been calling, we're the custodians of the tools. Yep. And we trust that you're going to keep them in a condition which is not just clean, but also modern for us to use, and also bring to us solutions that we aren't even aware of. And it definitely is a balancing act. And one of the things that worries me the most on a daily basis is there something that my stakeholders are needing that I'm not seeing? That we're missing on, that we're not delivering on, that we're not innovating enough on, or that we're handling irresponsibly. I think that's one of the biggest concerns. And the more applications individuals we add to this team, the higher that number of stakeholders becomes. And that I think is where that creates the glue. If you have that trust, and if you break that trust, then to me, you've created just another siloed organization.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, Mike, it's great having you on here, man. Glad we could finally make it happen. Next time I'm up at your office, I'll take you out to your favorite restaurant. I think you said it was it Sbarro Pizza in Times Square you wanted to go to, I think?
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one. I do love,
extra round pizza. Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for the last few years working together. You've been very helpful on this journey as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining, and have a good one.
Take it easy, guys.